Okay, I want to talk about inheritance in more detail. Mostly focus in Scala language. Right, so what is inheritance again, right? We have class A and a derived class B. We have a base class. And, right, in our Scala notation, we would say that class B extends A. The idea is that whatever content A has, right, maybe it has some variables x and y and some functions foo and bar, then B also gets those with the same definitions, right? We could have maybe an extra definitions afterwards. We can also override, right, the definition so that anything of type of class B will, when you call bar on it, it's going to do something different than what class A would do when it calls bar. So the derived class can have extra data or functions, and you can also override the previous stuff, right? One thing that we can't have, at least in Scala, is multiple inheritance, right? We can't have another class over here, A prime, and another class over here, a, say, double hat. That's not allowed because of what's called the deadly diamond. Right, so the idea is that if I have A and some derived classes, say B and C, and then another class down here that inherits from both B and C called D, right, and I want to look up, say, I want to call foo, which is up in A, right? So maybe C changes my foo, and maybe B overrides my foo. Which copy of foo should D use, right? Which copy should it inherit? And it's not very clear, right? So Scala just decides that you can't do this, right? We don't want to have a fight over which implementation of foo do I want to use when I say d.foo, right? I mean, we could override it down here so it doesn't matter, but it's still a tricky thing to deal with. In C++, you can do multiple inheritance and you can run into this sort of issue, but in Scala, we don't allow it. So we only allow single inheritance, and we'll see when I talk about traits, essentially how Scala handles multiple inheritance, right? So we're not allowed to inherit from a real class. We're only allowed to do multiple inheritance from virtual classes or abstract classes. What else do I want to say? The sort of key thing that makes all this class stuff work and really make it powerful is Liskov's substitution principle. All right, this is Barbara Liskov. Barbara Liskov from MIT came up with this principle, and it says that wherever an object of type A, our class, we should say, is needed, we can use an object of type or of class B. All right, so if B inherits from A, then we can use something of type or of class B anywhere that we would want to use something of type A. That makes sense, right? Because A contains, or B contains all the things that A contains. So if I wanted to call foo on an object of class B, I can, right? So if I was just talking about things at the level of A, I can do everything with an object of type B. So from the start, that seems fairly simple, but we can get a little more complex, right? So, and programmatically, we would say something like this. Right, if I have foo that takes in an A, and maybe I have a new B, then I can always call foo on B, right? This works, and that's Liskov's substitution principle. But this is also Liskov substitution principle. So if we have bar, it takes in an int and returns an a, and all it does is some stuff, and then it returns a new b, right? This is also okay, because it follows the Liskov substitution principle. So even though I said bar is going to return a, I can totally give back a b, because a b is a kind of a, right? B is inherits from a, so b has everything that a might have. So we can definitely return a new b in order to satisfy this type definition. The thing that we can't do, right, is sort of the opposite. So if we have baz that takes in an int and returns a b, right, I can't do some stuff and then return a new a. Right, and this also makes sense because what if I say b is a new baz of 1, and then I call b.extra, right? As I said over here, extra is just a function that only exists in b and not in a, so this doesn't make any sense because, right, I only gave a new a, and so this thing doesn't contain extra. I can't do that. Well, how does this other part work, right? How does this derived class being used as a base class concept actually implemented? And it's done through what's called dynamic dispatch. This is all sort of an example of dynamic dispatch. And in memory, when we have an object of type B, what happens is that we keep everything that's associated with A in a single little box, foo and bar. And then everything that's not is basically in an extra box, another box below. So this is only in B. And this is called a virtual table or a dispatch table. Dispatch. And so when we do something like this, bar returns an A, and what we really did is return a new B, is that we make this whole B box in memory, and then when we see it as an A, we restrict our attention just to this box, right? So we look at only the A section. There's still this extra box sitting below it in memory, but we completely ignore it, right? We pay no attention to that. We only look at the top little section here. And the powerful thing is that if we override bar here, so I'm going to do the override in pink. Where do we put the override? We don't actually put it in only in the B part, but we override it up in the A section. And that's what allows for dynamic dispatch. So the idea behind dynamic dispatch is that if I have elements of B and elements of A, and I try to call a shared function on both of them, the B ones will call the override version, while the A ones won't. Right, and that's because the overrides exist in this copy of A inside of the object of B. So when we upcast B into a class A, it keeps its override. And this is, right, I think I just mentioned it, but this idea of taking B and turning it into a type A is called upcasting. Right, for clear reasons, we're going up our hierarchy here. And we'll see this more in the Jupyter notebooks. The opposite, right, downcasting. This only works if what we started with was, right, if we wanted to take something that was of class A and turn it into something of class B, we can only do that if it was originally something of class B, right? So we can basically go B up to A, then back down to B, but we can't start with something in A and go straight down to B, right? And of course, that's exactly what we're pointing out here, is that normal downcasting isn't allowed. And why is that? It's because we want to be able to call everything that B is allowed to call. And so if we're starting with something that's of type A, doesn't have any of that extra stuff, how do we turn it into something lower down, right? So like we can't take an animal and turn all possible animal, just an animal, into a cat, right? But we can take a cat and turn it into an animal, conceptually, right? So downcasting is only allowed between, or from something that secretly actually is that same class. This is a little different, so this is how it works in Scala, but it's a little different in Python. So in Python, they use something called duck typing, which basically says if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it is a duck. And so we can have another class called C here, and it might have, right, it inherits from A, X, Y, foo, and bar, and it also implements some function called extra. It has the same signature, but it's completely separate, right? And we define C completely separately from B, so C does not inherit from B. And as far as Python would be concerned, these two are essentially the same class. We're able to cast something of type of class C into something of class B because they have all of the same signature, right? They look the same. There's no way to tell them apart from the outside. We didn't, give them that arrow to start with. We only had these two arrows in our hierarchy, but Python doesn't really care about the hierarchy as long as they look the same, right? So less about the taxonomy and more just about the pure physiognomy of it all. I think that's all I want to say on the board here. We're going to go through some more with the Scala notebook. But I hope this clears up some of the ideas behind Liskov substitution principle and when can we substitute one class for another.